Skydiving can help burn off calories. It's much safer than it might seem. And Shannon Clayton, a Canadian tattoo artist, even managed to do a tattoo on his girlfriend while free-falling. And a famous American skydiver, Jay Stokes, performed 640 jumps in one day. Guess where I found all of these fun facts? That's right, on the websites of companies that sell skydiving services. But of course, their websites feature no mention of the great number of tragic cases that happen when this extreme activity didn't go as planned. You'll forget about the breathtaking views when you realize your safety belt is unbuckled, or the wind blows your parachute right into the rocks. Yet there are countless less obvious reasons why skydiving can cause you to die in excruciating pain.
As always, viewer discretion is advised.
This video has gotten over 1 million views. In 2012, an 80-year-old Californian, Laverne, decided to go skydiving on her birthday, and it's something to be admired. At the start of the video, where Laverne is waiting for the takeoff, she looks very cheerful. But in the part of the video where the woman stands by the open door, you can see her legs go weak, and the smile disappears from her face. Laverne suddenly changed her mind and said a clear no. Yet, as if to encourage her, the instructor grabbed the woman and jumped off the plane with her. Nevertheless, in a few seconds, it turned out he should have listened to Laverne. The thing is, during a tandem flight, the client is strapped to the instructor with safety belts. The main attachment points can be placed around the waist, hips, or shoulders. Typically, a professional instructor would check the belts before the jump so that the client is both comfortable and attached securely enough to be safe. But somehow, after the plunge, the woman slipped out of the belts. Panicked, she started clutching at the instructor. Now, Laverne's fate depended on whether the man's strength would be enough to hold her until the landing. In this footage, we see Laverne holding on for dear life. The rest of the video with Laverne was made already on the ground, and luckily, she's alive and well in it. Yet, the woman was furious that her safety belts were not properly checked. But you have to realize that even if everything is fine with the parachute, an exciting flight can be turned into a veritable tragedy with just a gust of wind, or the slightest mistake in the calculation of the fall path. This is especially true about jumps in a wingsuit. It's an aerodynamic piece of clothing with nylon membranes between the arms, the legs, and the trunk, which allow the person to fly horizontally, resembling bird or bat flights. It's mostly used by base jumpers. They don't even need to take a plane anywhere, as in a wingsuit, they can simply jump off a cliff or another tall platform. Then, the flight direction is controlled with a tilt of the arms or the legs. Before landing, one just opens a small parachute, and that's it. It doesn't sound too hard, but in reality, a lot of base jumpers have suffered precisely because they failed to manage this kind of steering. The thing is, the amount of time you have to react to danger and avoid a tragedy is 5 seconds max. An American named Jeb Corliss experienced this firsthand. In his 18-year-long career in base jumping and wingsuiting, he performed lots of difficult jumps. One of them, for instance, was from the Eiffel Tower. But when he jumped off Table Mountain in South Africa in 2012, something went wrong. He was flying at a speed of around 193 kilometers per hour when he suddenly hit his leg against a flat granite rock protruding from the ground. Jeb broke both his ankles, 3 toes, and his fibula bone, tore his left anterior cruciate ligament, and suffered a skin laceration, for the closing of which he required a skin transplant. He had to stay in South Africa for over a year to recuperate and be able to go back home. When journalists asked him how his recovery was going, the man answered that he felt as if he was taking not painkillers, but pain. And he got lucky. Much more often, such mistakes cost wingsuiters their lives. In 2016, an Italian extreme sports enthusiast, Ermin Schmieder, was live-streaming his wingsuit descent from the summit of Kundersteg Mountain in Switzerland. This is how the livestream starts. Here, Ermin is in a great mood, telling his viewers that today they're joining him on his flight. Then, the guy puts the camera in his pocket and jumps down. At some point, the viewers hear a strange crash-like sound, and Ermin screams. The live stream's comment section got flooded with hundreds of messages. The viewers were trying to find out whether Ermin was all right and asked him to answer ASAP. However, the author of the footage never returned to the video frame. No one knows what exactly happened in that minute, but Ermin sustained injuries that were incompatible with life. Sadly, when something goes wrong during a jump, the person's chances of survival drop to nearly zero. Alexander Polli was also a famous base jumper whose leaps garnered millions of views on YouTube. Polli did not simply jump, he performed complex stunts. For instance, in 2013, Alexander flew at a speed of approximately 249 kilometers per hour through the narrow Batman Cave in Montserrat, Spain. This trick has been viewed over 13 million times. He seemed able to take on any dangerous challenge, but no. In August of 2016, he was in the French Alps, set to perform his next wingsuit flight. For this, Alexander went to a rather popular jumping place called the Base. Yet the proximity between the rocks made this spot very dangerous for base jumpers, leaving a lot of them injured. Nevertheless, this didn't stop Alexander. He was sure of his professionalism and ability to get out of any risky situation unscathed. So, without thinking for too long, he just leaped into the abyss. Everything went really well, as it always did. Alexander was maneuvering, making sharp turns, and was going to open his parachute to land soon, when suddenly, he miscalculated the distance to a rock and crashed into it at high speed. Sadly, it was impossible to survive such an impact. The most terrifying thing is that Alexander became one of the seven people who died during a jump from the base in a year. So why do people consciously take such a risk? Director Richard Perry, who made films about this kind of daredevils, says all wingsuiters actually understand that every flight can be their last. But the sensation they experience during flying is, in their own words, worth dying for. Yet sadly, it's precisely this attitude toward jumping that causes more and more tragic events. On October 8, 2013, Viktor Kovats, a Hungarian extreme enthusiast, was doing a training jump from the top of Tianmen mountain in the National Forest Park in China, just before the World Championship. Viktor wasn't there alone. Other skydivers and admirers of this breathtaking scene joined him on the mountain. And there it is, the flight. The onlookers watched in fascination as Viktor glided over the park until he disappeared from sight. And then, the man did not appear in an hour or two. And the scariest thing was that he didn't get in touch. A search and rescue operation was organized, and around 200 firefighters and police officers were involved. The area's difficult terrain complicated the mission since everyone understood Viktor could be anywhere. In a ravine, in the forest, he could have gotten caught up in a tree, when suddenly he was found. The man lay at the base of a 100-meter tall rock. When the rescuers approached him, it became clear that Viktor wasn't breathing anymore. He had sustained a head injury and lost a lot of blood. So it turns out even professional wingsuiters aren't immune to accidents, especially when the sensation of a thrill simply doesn't cut it for them anymore. And as proof, there's a story that happened that same year to Mark Sutton. He was the stuntman who, during the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in London, did a parachute jump dressed up as James Bond. After such an uproar, in the following year, Mark and his friend were invited to the Alps as guests of a company specializing in filming extreme sports. There, the two friends were taken up in a helicopter over the Sutton area, where they plunged in wingsuits from the staggering height of 3,300 meters. The men had been planning to perform a so-called proximity flight. This means that Mark and his companion were flying as close as possible to the mountains and rocks on purpose. This technique is used by skydivers who believe regular flights are too easy for them. Time passed, and Mark's friend was the only one to land in the designated spot. What exactly happened to the famous stuntman that day is still unknown, since the police don't provide extended comments. We only know that Mark was found dead after that jump, and he most likely crashed into a rock. But there's something even more dangerous than wingsuiting: group parachute jumping. On August 27, 1967, skydivers from Ohio were presented with the opportunity to jump off a modified military airplane from an altitude of 6,000 meters. It was a North American B-25 Mitchell bomber, and on top of everything else, the event was free of charge. At the time, this kind of sport was relatively new and expensive, so enthusiasts of the extreme made use of every opportunity to register for such a leap. For this adventure, 30 people arrived at Ortner Airport in Wakeman early in the morning. Upon arrival, they found out the flight might not happen due to increased cloudiness. This upset the participants. They had to wait and hope the weather would improve. In the afternoon, the fog eased just a little bit, and then the pilots decided to take off. The skydivers hurried to put on some extra warm clothes over their jumpsuits, since at the altitude from which they would be jumping, the temperature reached minus 34 degrees Celsius, and the plane had no isolation or heating. But when all the participants took their place in the vehicle, it turned out there were too many passengers, and the bomber was overloaded. So, The less experienced skydivers were asked to vacate their places in favor of their more experienced colleagues. The participants who were left at the airport wistfully watched the airplane take off without them, but they didn't have the slightest idea that this unfortunate event would save their lives. At that moment, the bomber pilot was relying only on the dispatcher's instructions to stay on course, as the fog was still quite thick, and it was almost impossible to steer the airplane. When the dispatcher informed the pilot that the plane had done a U-turn over Ortner, he gave the permission to jump. The skydivers rushed to the open door and saw nothing but fog outside. Nevertheless, they decided to jump, foregoing the regulations of the Federal Aviation Administration. One by one, the 18 thrill-seekers plunged into the abyss in 30 seconds. A jump into the fog is an unforgettable experience. It's like falling into puffy cotton candy and soaring right into oblivion. But the skydivers' euphoria didn't last long. Right before the landing, the fog started dissipating, and the jumpers saw that they were falling right into a lake. A thrilling adventure turned into a real survival test since the parachuters landed into the ice-cold water and started drowning. The excess layers of clothing immediately got wet and started pulling the skydivers to the bottom. An off-duty shore patrol officer saw the parachuters and quickly informed the rescue services. He involved 30 civilian boatmen in the search for the victims, but their efforts were hampered by the cold and strong wind. 2 men on a pleasure boat saved 3 skydivers, but none of them could be resuscitated. But what about the rest? They never made it to the shore. When the plane returned to the airfield, the pilot found out he had just sent the skydivers to certain death. But how did this happen? As it turned out, right after the bomber took off, it was followed by a single-engine Cessna 180, whose passengers were supposed to take photos of this mass jump. Then, the dispatcher mixed up the 2 planes and gave them the wrong instructions. That's why the bomber pilot told the skydivers to jump when they were actually not over Ortner, but Lake Erie. This disaster became the most tragic event in skydiving since 16 people died in it. Regarding the question of who's responsible for the incident, opinions differ. Some believe it was the pilot's fault, and others blame the dispatcher. But the main point of this story is that all the event participants, including the parachuters, broke the golden rule of skydiving. Don't jump if you can't see the target. But there are cases when a parachute jump can save a life instead of taking it. Belgium, 2013. 11 people, including the pilot and the instructors, took off from a small airport near the city of Namur. The atmosphere aboard was festive, and there was laughter, since it was one of the passengers' birthday. The guests organized a mass parachute jump as a birthday present. Suddenly, one of the passengers froze, looking out of the illuminator. Then he screamed at the top of his lungs, "The wing!" As it turned out, a few minutes after takeoff, at an altitude of around 3 kilometers, a part of the airplane wing broke off. The passengers started panicking as the plane was on the point of crashing. The only way out was to jump. Yet the vehicle was shaking so much that everyone was being tossed about in different directions. Apart from that, its falling trajectory resembled a spiral, so it was difficult to jump with a parachute. Still, a trio of daredevils took a risk and plunged without a second thought. In a moment, the plane crashed near Fernelmont town. The 3 passengers who jumped out with their parachutes were found not far from the crash site. All of them were dead, as well as the rest of the passengers, the instructors, and the pilot. Maybe if the victims had reacted faster, a parachute jump would have saved their lives. Like during the incident that happened in Wisconsin in 2013. Parachuting instructor Mike Robinson was at the needed height seconds before his 4th jump in a day. Aboard the plane, he was joined by 8 other people, 2 of whom were pilots. The rest of the skydivers were instructors or trainers and had hundreds, if not thousands, of jumps under their belts. For example, it was Robinson's 937th jump. So, when the plane was passing over northwest Wisconsin, near Lake Superior, Mark was about to leap into the abyss when some powerful crash happened. A wing got torn off the airplane, and everything around burst into flames. At that moment, another plane crashed into theirs. Its pilot had lost control of the vehicle. Both airplanes were burning with people inside. Wasting no time, all of the skydivers immediately started jumping out to avoid burning to death. The pilot of Robinson's plane managed to get out, but the pilot of the other vehicle did not. Despite the crash, he still somehow landed the airplane at Richard I. Bong Airport, from which it had departed. No one was hurt in the incident, So you might consider parachute jumping at least once. Who knows? Maybe it'll save your life someday. Of course, in this video, I have compiled for you examples of the most horrific skydiving injuries and deaths. But I must note that deadly incidents happen approximately once in 10,000 jumps. So it's not more dangerous than driving a car, during which every 147th accident ends in death. And of course, again, I've just read you the information I found on the sites of the companies that sell skydiving services. Write in the comments if you dare to do something like that after watching this video, and what extreme events you'd like to hear more about in future episodes.